Okay, hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us at 9:30 on Friday morning. I can't say I was thrilled when I got the time slot. Yes, thank you. You've all made it. You've all made it early morning, made it in. And I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited about the panelists that I've got to join me for today's discussion. So a little bit of context. So I'm Miriam Wells. I'm the Impact and Strategy Editor at The Examination. We're a non-profit newsroom that investigates global health threats, specifically looking at preventable death and disease driven by corporate activity. And I'm the impact editor there, as I said. This was a role that I held at my previous workplace, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in the UK. We created the role in 2019, and it was quite innovative at that time, and we spent a lot of time, I've spent a lot of time over the years sort of talking to other newsrooms and other organizations, seeking to sort of maximize their impact, which is the purpose of the role. It's really seeking to kind of intentionally, strategically design journalism from start to finish and way beyond finish, to sort of maximize the real world change that it drives in the world. And as I've gone around the world talking about this, the first question I always get when I give these kind of talks about this role and this work is, hang on, isn't this activism? This sounds like activism, this isn't journalism. I've obviously got some thoughts about that, but I thought it would be good at a stage like Perugia to really have that discussion and get into this question properly, because it's something that, you know, people always want to talk about. So we're going to spend half an hour talking about that today, and we really want this, I know everyone says this, but we really want this to be a conversation. So we will do questions at the end, but actually if something just strikes you during our conversation and you have something you want to add, just shove your hand up and we will just get you involved in our conversation. So I've got three brilliant panelists who all have really different kind of experiences and perspectives that I think are going to be really interesting and valuable. We've got Khalil Kasimani sat next to me. He's the former head of audience at The Conversation and the current head of special projects. And he's a consultant. He does a lot of thinking and working around audience and user needs and what people are really getting out of the journalism that we give to them, and how to, you know, and how to maximize that experience for the people that are consuming your work. We've got Ankita Anand. She's an editor at Unbiased the News, which is a feminist and anti-racist newsroom which supports local journalists to publish globally. And she's also co-founder of the Gender Beat, which is a collective advocating for more and better feminist journalism around the world. And then we have, at the end of our table, we have Rona Meyer, who is wearing many hats for this conversation, which is what I'm excited about. She's a freelance journalist and researcher, Nigerian, German. She's worked with sort of from every area of this debate. She's worked as a grant manager. She's sat on grant juries. She's been a grant recipient. She's a journalist herself. So she's thought about and had the experience of hearing others' perspectives on impact from all different kind of areas. So let's get started. And I think to start this conversation, we kind of need to begin with talking about the definition of impact in itself, because, you know, where you sit in this debate about whether seeking impact makes you an activist really depends on what you think impact is and how you're defining it. So could each of you just start by talking a little bit about how you, or your newsroom, or you in your own work, how you define impact and how you're sort of measuring it? Who wants to go first? Khalil?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for being here. I suppose the definition of impact for the conversation, which is where I spent quite a lot of my time working with. So just for quick context, the conversation is a global media organization, and we get academics to write for a broader public. So one of the main ways we think about impact is really the impact on the academics themselves, the authors of the content. It's slightly different, I suppose, to how many people view impact. But for us, you know, the opportunities that come out of writing for the conversation is a measure of impact on, you know, what we can do for the academics themselves. So we look at that in, you know, many different ways. The opportunities that the academics get after they write for us, so maybe media opportunities, career opportunities. Just an example, you know, a few years ago, one rocket scientist who wrote a piece for us was invited by NASA to work on some special project that they had going on. So it's really about the expertise that those people, those academics, those researchers, those scientists have, and the ability through the conversation to have a much broader impact, because their work and their expertise goes beyond the walls of academia. It goes way, way, way beyond. So that's just one way we track impact. So I suppose today in this panel, I'll wear my conversation hat, but also wear my journalist hat as well, but we can talk a bit about that afterwards as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Khalil. And Kita?
Miriam, I thought I'll talk through two stories, personal and about my newsroom, because there's so much to talk about. I wanted to narrow it down to things that we do not usually consider impact, but are. So a personal story, as an independent journalist, I went to cover these khab panchayats in India, which are kind of kangaroo courts, and they were being blamed, rightly so, for issuing these diktats against women, telling them what to wear, whether they can carry mobile phones, who they can marry or not, and the punishments were brutal. The media had written about different small incidents, not small, but different incidents that had happened. And I went to do a deep dive on it, and in the beginning they didn't want to talk to me because they said, well, you've decided what you think about us, so why are you here? I said, well, I'm just here to learn more, and okay, I have read the reports, but I'm here to learn more, so I'm completely open to what you have to say. And then I talked to a bunch of people, one of them an old man who said that he has now retired from the job. He talked for about 3 hours, and at the end of it, I asked him to, requested him to stand next to his wife so I could take their photograph. And he was silent, there was a pause. I thought, okay, he is not ready to be photographed. And I was just going to move on when he said, I'm not fit to stand next to her. I have really wronged her. And his wife was right next to him. She was feeding the cows there, and she stood up straight, and we looked at each other with blank faces, not knowing what to say. And that, for me, is impact. If at the end of a 3-hour conversation where there are no accusations or leading questions, and I'm just there listening to him, asking him about, okay, what is the process of your court? How do people bring complaints? How do you decide what is right and wrong, et cetera, he has apparently a change of heart. This was not, I didn't imagine that this would happen. Another example from the newsroom, Unbiased the News, my colleagues are here. We published a piece that got a lot of recognition. The journalists got a lot of recognition. And after all this happened, they mailed me to say that at the point that they published the story with us, they were thinking of actually quitting journalism. We don't have to go into the reasons. We all know there are 100 reasons to quit. But because the story got so much attention, and we always focus on underreported stories, and we are very particular that local journalists should cover their communities, or you have to collaborate. You can't just swoop down somewhere, and then do parachute journalism. So things changed for them, and they went on to do a master's in journalism and so on. So that also is impact. And it is not activism, because here we are not controlling or trying to control what impact we want, who we want to be arrested, or which ban we want to come into place, because we also always do not know what is good for a community. It is not our place to tell someone, this is what you need this factory to be closed down, or you need this mine to be closed down, etc., because the community knows best. So we can only do our jobs, hope for some kind of impact that will be for the better, for the larger good. But we are not controlling it, so we are journalists, not activists.
I love both of those stories that Ankita tells. The one yesterday you told me about the man who sort of had this change of heart. I really love that story, because that shows actually something that I think we forget about sometimes, that there can be so much powerful impact just from the process of doing the journalism on from how you operate and how you listen to people, or how people are able to tell their story, or in this case, how he's able to sort of hear his own story and have a change of heart, and to be able to have that kind of meaningful just do something really meaningful for one person just by how you're operating as a journalist and how you're involving them in the process or listening to them, I think, feels so much more powerful and meaningful to me than, some of the more traditional metrics that we may have measured as, in our impact trackers. Rona, you've got many different, I guess, perspectives on this you've heard of sort of every which way of measuring and defining impact, I guess. So what's your take on this question, this first question?
So hi everyone, thank you for this. I'm very interested in what you all have to say, believe me. And if there's anything I don't explain properly, just grab me at any time. So if you see me looking down, I want to save the time and be direct. The definition of impact that I work with is that impact is the direct effect or influence that any journalistic endeavor has on the social, cultural, geopolitical, and psychological state of your audience or your stakeholders. Now, the journalistic endeavor in my case has been all sorts of things. It has been as a commissioning editor. It has been as a collaboration coordinator for investigative journalists across countries or continents. It has been as grant manager for 3 years for a New York-based NGO, the Africa Initiative. It has been assessing impact for Deutsche Welle's Constructive Journalism Fellowship in Africa. So some of the metrics that we have measured across the board is number of stories, newsletter subscriptions, number of people or trainers trained, training courses, but those are often donor-driven, I've found. And then the more qualitative metrics would be the influence on a journalist's career, the influence on the newsroom. So, for example, if your grant is working with individual journalists, we measure the impact on your colleagues. So that's a fall-on effect. The psychological effect on sources. So, for example, we've measured how policemen began to trust journalists. With juries, you are tending to look at potential impact. So when you are giving a grant for a newsroom, you are looking at the potential products that they can have. Are these products going to be what they call SaaS, service as a software, for example? Are these products going to scale? But most of the time, the nitty-gritty is that it's like, what is the relevance continent-wise? So I find that with juries is the implied impact in advance, but with the newsrooms, it's like, okay, this is the type of impact. What I've come to find out, I'll close with this, is every single stakeholder has something different. Those issuing the grants have different impacts. The journalists applying for the grant, different metrics for impact. The people being reported on, different metrics. The contributors and those who are supposed to respond, policymakers, totally different. And we can unpack that. The last thing is that you can be busy having all these lovely impacts on paper, but nothing prepares you for some type of impact. Like the grantee who named their child after the initiative. They actually named their child Sojo. And Sojo is a girl, and she's now 3 years old. That's short for solutions journalism. We did not know where to put that impact. We didn't know how to report it. So I think just in-house, because traditionally in Africa, children are named after the circumstances of their birth. But that program made such an impact on the parent that they named their child after the initiative. And so that just goes to show that you can be busy planning something and impact will pop up and give you something else.
Yeah, again, I love this, all of these examples about it's not just about the product, right? You talked about the endeavor and what that can do for people before we even begin to talk about any story that might have X number of reaches or might have politicians cite it or whatever, which are the
awards.
Awards while you're doing it. So let's get on to the question of the hour, which is this line. So we've got lots of roles in newsrooms around the world now actively trying to maximize the impact, thinking about how we can design and distribute the journalism to drive more change. So what are your thoughts on this line? When does impact become activism? Is that even, is there even such Is it possible to create a line that you would step over? You know, I'm finding that I'm slipping into the next question, but I think the framing of this question, or the framing of the answer and the debate around it always seems to, it can vary a lot according to where in the world you are from, how much power and privilege your outlet holds. My experience, this anxiety of, hang on, we're journalists, you know, we're not activists, it's not our job. That anxiety has always been expressed to me most strongly from journalists in the global minority, from especially legacy publications. Like the sort of bigger and more legacy the publication, the stronger that anxiety seems to come through. This idea of kind of, you know, we have this special kind of objective truth-telling role. We find our truth, we tell this truth, and then it's, you know, it's nothing to do with us, what happens with that truth. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on this kind of debate, and what role do you think power and privilege in the journalism industry play into this debate? Big question. But.
Big question. I guess the way I look at it is, you know, what line, right? Like, is there a line? Should there be a line? I think ultimately, everyone who becomes a journalist or works in a newsroom or in a news organization, a media organization, we enter this industry for a purpose. We work for certain media organizations for a purpose. We want to achieve something. And journalism, the way I see it, journalism is just a tool to achieve the hopefully meaningful change that we want to see in the world. So with that framing in mind, if the way we do journalism needs to be a little bit different from the status quo journalism, if that is what we need to do to achieve the change that we want to achieve, then so be it. Like, why is that wrong? I'm not sure. Now, having said that, you know, different people enter this field, enter this industry with different purposes, and that's completely fine. A lot of people want to be able to, you know, share information so that other people can use that information to make decisions. Great, brilliant. But not everyone enters that field with that purpose. A lot of people become journalists because they want to actively change something for their own people, for their parents, for, you know, people that they feel close to, or just for the entire planet, whatever. And to be able to make that change, they need to do things a little bit differently, right? And that is fine too. I think one of the things that I get a little bit frustrated about is there is, especially in as you say, in like the global minority, there is that view that, oh, there's only one way to do journalism, and it needs to be like this, or it's wrong. It isn't wrong, because I would think that the majority of journalists in the world don't think like this. You know, a lot of people in Mauritius, where I come from, and you know, I would count me as well as part of that as well. When I do acts of journalism, I do it for a purpose. I do it because when the government isn't doing something right, I need to be able to tell that story on an international level in the hope that it puts pressure on the government so that they are able to change the things that, you know, they're trying to do. You know, it's fine. Like, why is that a problem? I guess what I'm trying to say is different people have different purposes. We need to be quite clear about why we want to do journalism, and then we do journalism in service of the broader change that we want to do. If you want to say that that is activism, great. Activism, journalism is good.
So I feel like I want to applaud that. It felt like a call to action. Great. Ankita, how about you?
I used to be an activist, so I'm always especially careful of being a little distant and not being influenced by my past, etc. I went to the state in India, which is heavily conflict-ridden, and I plan to spend 2 weeks there, do some long-form stories. And then in the middle of it, my source tells me that there's a protest going on and I need to cover it. And I don't do breaking news. I'm scared of doing breaking news and getting things wrong in that short period of time. So huge respect to anyone who does it. I said, but I don't cover these things. And they said, but there's no one from the national media who has covered it, and you're from the national media. And I'm not, I'm a freelancer. But I came from Delhi, and for them that is national. And I thought, like, am I getting pulled into something? Because, you know, for me, protests were part of my past life, organizing them and participating in them. And I thought, they're just asking me to cover it. They're not telling me what story I have to write. And I'm here, and I can't just ask my source to help me with my story and not look at what their need is. Because that's, you know, I can't build a relationship with this community this way. So I said, okay, I'll do it. I covered it, and luckily, doesn't always happen with freelancers. It got published the next day. And I got a call from my source saying, oh, you published your news report, and the people have been picked up, and they're in jail. And I felt terrible. I said, I'm so sorry. What can I do? I can come there. And he said, no, it's all good. People are happy because they had been sitting on protest for 10 days. Nobody was taking notice. And now they feel like finally they are being seen because it got published in the national media. And it's fine, they were given lunch and released after 3 hours. So I didn't even know if everyone was fine with that impact, but they said, no, it's okay. So impact is also such a slippery thing. And this thing, like, there was this question for me in the middle about, they don't bother with these distinctions, but I have to take care that I don't become an activist. But then, if I'm a journalist and something is happening and the people I want to do longer stories with and I need to interview them, and if they feel like, no, this is important and we need this to be covered, I have to do it. So just an example again of things that don't often get covered in courses or workshops, but then we are confronted with them and we have to make a choice in the moment.
Mm-hmm. And in your previous answer, Ankita, maybe you could elaborate a bit on, you know, you're not going to, it's not our role to lobby for a specific outcome or a, you know, we want, that maybe that's where the, you know, that's where the line can be. We want to see change on an issue. Of course, we wouldn't be reporting. You know, I think it's disingenuous when we're all writing about, you know, terrible, awful things. Of course, we're writing about them. We don't want those terrible, awful things to be happening anymore. But that doesn't mean that it's not necessarily the journalist's job to go and say specifically what, you know, what the measure that should be taken is, but it is their job to sort of raise the awareness, get the information there, make sure that those decisions can be based on actual evidence and empathy and so on. And I think you were saying something similar in your first answer, that that's where the step too far would be, right? To be actually trying to bring about a specific.
Yeah, also very self-important to think that, like, we should, like, almost bordering on megalomaniac to think that we are going to do this, and then, like, I would be scared of if I start thinking and working like that in a very narrow, constricted sense. Of course, we want a certain kind of impact, that the polluting factory should not be polluting, etc. But in that moment, whether that should just, like, take care of its, like, cover its environment bases and continue to function, that is a decision that that community will take, and not me. So I would be extremely wary of going with a plan like that.
Mm-hmm. Rona, you've got some really great perspectives on this question.
So you asked, is it possible to have a line that you can cross that demarcates impact from activism? Absolutely. Why do we have this confusion? It is because there are two types of blurring of the line between impact and activism. The first is the lines are automatically contextually blurred. So for example, I think, I see someone nodding there, they will probably nod some more because I think they'll understand the context. What Khalil was saying, when you don't, from my experience, when you don't have police that functions, you might, as a journalist, as an investigative journalist, have to do some of that policing work, not because you want to be a superhero, but to safeguard yourself when against litigation. So in an African context, it's going to look crazy to a journalist from the global north that why is this journalist actually going so far ahead to do all sorts of things, almost as if they want to do a citizen's arrest. It is because there is no police. And if you don't have some high level of proof and documentation, you will end up being For example, if you don't have a chain where you really record buying cough syrup from cartels, you will be arrested as the person who is the drug dealer, and nothing will happen. So when the line is blurred, for example, there's a news desert, and a journalist is saying, I think we will need more funds to actually work with CSOs and translate the investigation from English or the story to more languages. It becomes like, why do you want to work with the CSOs? That's activism. But we need to understand that when these lines are blurred, it's the difference between disinformation taking root and injustice happening. We now see that this impact and activism, based on what's happening in the US, people are now discussing journalism as a public service. So when you remove the root of democracy, when you remove the infrastructure for a just society, sometimes impact begins to look like activism. However, there is activism that hides as impact, which I absolutely hate. And this is how you can tell the line. When it's a one-person show, so for example, there are a lot of collaborations where you can easily spot activism behavior. The newsroom is run by one person, for example. It's a bootstrapped place, great. There's no harm, great to work with small newsrooms. But then when you dig deeper, and I've learned to start asking questions like, who owns this media house? Where did you get the funding? You find that they are funded by politicians, and they will act as activists in line with that politician, along the line of that story. So sometimes you have to look out for signs where it is very clear. Another type of warning line is when your investigation or your story is only based on leaks from somebody. You immediately know that at some point, you are doing some activist work, whether that leak is from a CSO, I don't care, whether it's from a politician, whether it's from your source. If you don't find a way to put bottlenecks against this, to check and balance these lines, you will end up with impact that is actually activism. So those are my lines.
Yeah, and that feeds into, this question of when are you imperiling, what measures do we put in place to make sure our integrity as journalists is secure? You spoke about them, Ankita or Khalil, have you got any thoughts on, what are the sort of guardrails that you might be putting in place that you would be able to use to defend yourself from, accusations of, oh, you're just, you're skewed, you've got an agenda.
Yeah, so I guess from my perspective, so I suppose my space is slightly different from my fellow panelists in the sense that I don't necessarily see a line between activism and journalism. I think they're both, tools to achieve something. Again, I always sort of come back to the purpose of why we're doing what we're doing. I think for me and for many people, the purpose is grounded in the humanity, in doing something good for people, really. So if that brands us as, activists, so be it. As long as what we are doing is leading to some form of change, that's great. And of course, there needs to be like a plurality of different views, et cetera, et cetera. The work that I and fellow activist journalists do, that content or whatever we're producing, it is part of a broader context of information that exists, right? So people will get different types of information. Change will come, different change, I suppose, will come from different types of information that we get. But I think we do need activists, and we do need activist journalists to push boundaries. And I see that as the role of an activist journalist. But we also need different types of reporting, different ways of looking at things. That also contributes to a change. So I think sometimes when we talk about, activist journalists, etc., sometimes we think, oh, everything is activist journalism. We're just like zeroing in on that specific thing. But the reality is that activist journalism exists in a broader, plethora of different ways of doing journalism, and all of that is fine. Everyone will receive some criticism. It is part of it. I think, again, ultimately, if you're achieving, your purpose, then that's it. There's no question.
Yes, a lot of it. I think a lot of it comes back to the sort of myth of objectivity. Like, I think what you're talking about, Khalil, is just being more open. That yes, I'm coming from this particular position and I'm doing this journalism for this reason. And there can be this notion with, some other more traditional types of journalism that no, we're just, gathering these objective facts and truths, but without but whilst ignoring, well, from what position and what's your worldview, and there's a lot that's going on behind the scenes that make the decisions about what those objective facts are, or what those methods of information gathering should be. Yes, I've gone off track, but Ankita, what are your thoughts on, I guess, in our earlier conversations, actually, you talked really interestingly about, with certain communities, with certain types of journalism, you can't just approach them as sort of an objective, neutral, they're not going to trust you with their stories. You have to be part of that community. You have to be an active sort of person, actively seeking good for that community, for them to even, consider spending time with you or telling them your story. So, I'm interested in, is it possible to be, an objective truth, pure truth-telling journalist detached from the world? In many parts of the world, it feels like that's not, that's not going to work with many communities.
I wouldn't worry too much about that because being in touch with your communities, Rona talked about public service, and how do we know what kind of service they need if we are not in touch with them and kind of in close proximity? That doesn't mean that we have to be an activist or just take their viewpoints and not take answers from corporations and government and just write that. That would be the activism part, maybe. So I also feel like we say that we are in public service, but often we become quite obsessed with governments and corporations. And of course, we have to look at them because they hold so much power and money. But at some subconscious level, I feel like it's that relationship where you are rebelling against your parents, but for everything you do, you need parental approval. So here, you're just looking for them to do something as a result of your report. And of course, it makes sense, because if my community or any community is facing a problem, and the government looks at my report, is forced to bring about positive change, makes sense. But also, ultimately, I have to go back to the community and check, what they thought of the report also, and what changes came about, because then the feedback I get there will ultimately also shape my future reporting. So I think sometimes it becomes kind of this egotistical thing that we have with those in power, because now we want to assert our power as journalists, and we have forgotten, what the people are saying. Or if somebody is saying that, oh, I felt really hurt talking to you, we were discussing this, Miriam. And that also is important impact, but we feel like, that's not good enough. Like, I want a big, policy change here, and I want my award, and this doesn't matter to me. Like, I wouldn't say that. I would really respect what's happening here also with this community, which includes sources and interviewees and all of them.
Yeah, 100%. If you can make an actual meaningful impact on one human's life that lasts for... Oh, we've got a question. Oh, excellent. Yeah.
Okay. I will have a microphone. My name is Fernando Morales de la Cruz. My name is Fernando Morales de la Cruz. I'm an investigative journalist focused exclusively on the exploitation of children by companies. I have been accused many times of being an activist, which is an honor. But, if you are investigating violations of children's rights, what are you supposed to do? Keep quiet?
Exactly.
Or even fight against your colleagues, journalists, as I have been doing, because they don't report, for example, that in Germany there are many families that exploit more than 500,000 children, or that the government of Norway is an investor in 8,500 corporations, and they profit from the exploitations of tens of millions of children. So I just want to point out that in my own view, which is only mine, and humbly, I will defend, we cannot be neutral when somebody is being raped, exploited, or killed, or something illegal is happening. And this is what actually Mrs. Graham did so brilliantly with Watergate. She said, even if I lose the newspaper, we publish it. She was not a political activist. She was just standing for the Constitution of the United States And unfortunately, the owner has changed. But we can talk about that another day. So the one thing I would like to ask you is to please, if somebody like me, crazy enough, comes here to accuse every journalist who's not publishing that Nazi families have more than 500,000 children today, working for them mostly in Africa and in Latin America, please don't be offended. I just think that it's the duty of every journalist to defend every child, whatever the color.
Thank you, Fernando. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's sort of, we're all, presumably anybody that is a journalist is at least standing for truth and justice, and I guess that is, you know, if you're standing for truth and justice, that, and I want to get onto the weaponization of the word activist, which you've talked about, but I also see another comment or question over here, so I'd love to take that, yeah.
Well, it was really a question. What do you owe the people you report on? Isn't there like an ethical imperative to, when you go and take somebody's story, what are you giving back to them? Are they giving you that story with an expectation of something? And as a journalist, shouldn't you honor that by actually trying to pursue that which they want and that reason why they're speaking to you?
Ankita, do you want to take this first, then Rona?
That's a question that the people also ask, because a lot of times these are people who have been interviewed in the past, who are already suffering at various levels, and they are annoyed and they ask you, why have you come? What are we going to get out of this? And I have to say, I cannot promise you any impact. Maybe there would be some, I don't know what it would look like, I'm not sure. What I will do is listen to you and take your story, and this is the magazine I'm working for, here it will be published, etc. And so far nobody has said no, because maybe being heard is also important, and being quoted correctly, and also just spending time. Like, I usually, because I'm freelance and I do long form, I have time, I go with time. Often I don't have a return ticket. I decide based on what's happening there. So I feel like that is in my power to give. Also knowing my limitations and not promising the moon when I really can't do that. And so that's what I offer. And most of the times, they're like, so far they have been okay with that offer, and it has gone fine.
So for me, it's just simple. It's to what the first speaker said. Good journalism is activism, because it causes an impact. Now, whether that result, that effect or influence is political, so be it. Because I've noticed that it is when the impact is political that we get accused of being activists. However, it's nobody's fault if your story informs, so this has happened. The story informed people in a region that made them now vote differently in the next elections. That is a political impact. Is it the fault of the journalist? No. So for me, I don't think we should get ourselves bogged down. We should be clear on why there is the need for the journalist to go the extra mile. To your question, I often, and my colleagues, we have to go the extra mile. So as editor, there are some techniques I've learned. I did not learn these techniques from journalism school, even though I've studied journalism up to PhD level. I learned it actually from academic research. And it's the ethics of academic research where you don't extract from the people that you are interviewing. And so the main technique is you have to find a way to have a feedback loop that gives them the finished product in their language, in the mode they prefer. So I will tell you that I do things like WhatsApp versions of the story and send to them. I check back in with them and also ask colleagues, please check back in with them. Now, 10 years ago, somebody would be somewhere saying I'm an activist. However, we have to really walk ourselves back through. Is it a surprise that our audiences are not literate? They need media literacy. There's a congressman in the US that did not know what editorial meant. It is because the colleagues who could have educated the public were told they were being activists. The colleagues who could have gone the extra mile were told they were activists. If we don't do this activist part of journalism, we are going to continue to have audiences that are not interested, that don't trust us, and that don't see the news as something they can use, because it's not in the form they can consume, and it has not prioritized them in the production. And that is what I call the weaponization of the impact activism conversation. It is weaponized to censor colleagues. It is weaponized to save costs, because it costs more to follow up, to have an open return ticket. And I just hope we can self-reflect when we make these arguments, because contexts are different. And what is activism in one place is actually not in another.
Mm. Yeah, and we're seeing these kind of attacks, obviously, in a massively renewed and fresh way right now. You know, in the US, in Germany, lots of places we've got, you know, the political establishment really decrying the media as being sort of untrustworthy ideological mouthpieces. I think we really are seeing that weaponization of the word activism really strongly. Like, how do we defend ourselves against these attacks in this context, and how do we sort of, stand up for truth and justice without just speaking to an echo chamber? It feels like we're in a challenging time. Has anybody got thoughts on this question? Khalil?
I do,
Rona?
but you want to go? I think the way we can do this is realize one thing. We're all on the same side. No donor goes into funding journalism for it not to have impact. No journalist risks their lives. No editor, has sleepless nights planning against threats. We're all on the same side, even though what we are looking at looks different. I think that's the first thing we need to understand. The second thing is we have to self-reflect and have yardsticks. If you say somebody is being an activist, on what basis are you saying that? Are they affiliated with a political party? Did they used to do PR for a political party before? These are real-life situations we've had to sort of understand. Are they biased? Do they run the newsroom in a way that they can decide which sources get quoted or not? Then you might be saying, okay, this is the basis, we have some concerns, how do we address it? Your story is only from one leak, we cannot cross-verify. The argument against activism has to be based not just on vibes, or not just because I know better than you because I'm from the global north or south or vice versa. We have to self-reflect and come up with yardsticks. We also have to know that there's no point doing journalism if it's not going to have an effect. So impact cannot be ignored.
I've just realized we've got, 5 minutes. Oh dear, but we've had 2 questions. All right, let's do questions.
Yeah.
As many as we can fit in. Hi.
Good morning, I'm Hui from Lighthouse Reports. I'd like to ask the panel, I understand that sometimes the impact may be unexpected, but to what extent should you design an investigation for specific impact? And how transparent should you be about that? And what kind of implications it might have on the trust that you have with your audience?
Well, I mean, this is what I'm doing in my role as impact editor at the Bureau now, and now at the examination. And I guess the way I'm seeing it is we're just trying to strategically design our investigations to do their job properly, right? So the impact that I'm designing it for isn't that a specific law gets changed or a specific, we're not making sure that we want a specific outcome to happen, but we are trying to make sure that journalism really can inform decisions, can inform behavior, can really meet the people who can use it, who can benefit it, who can pay attention to it, who just can use it in some way. We want to design the journalism to be both like actively useful and actively used in the world, because that's what journalism is for. By just simply publishing, deciding what we think is important and investigating and publishing through traditional channels, it's just like it might get used, and in large case it will. But if you actually actively, intentionally try and design it to be useful and to put it out in such a way that it can be used by the most kind of people, then then we're just doing our job better, I think. So, but I think the transparency is really key, because that's, for me, is how you do defend yourself from these accusations of activism. You're very transparent. You explain exactly what your mission is as a newsroom, what you will do, what you won't do, what designing for impact looks like. So I try and talk about it as much as possible, because you do need to have that. If you're just completely transparent about what you're doing, that is really key to maintaining the integrity and maintaining the trust, I think. So, yeah. All right, I hope that, but also we're all really, really happy to continue talking after this session, so please come and grab us after. Hi.
Hi, I'm Stefan from Germany. I just want to make the case for the big news companies trying to just tell the truth and not to have an agenda, because I think the most important, first, we believe that the truth will make the world better, even if we don't have a political goal, telling the truth. And secondly, you lose trust if you try to achieve a political goal, because the readers and the listeners and the viewers, they check this, and you see the result in losing trust from at least one part of the country, the political opposition to your goals. You see this in the United States, where more than half the people don't believe the so-called mainstream media anymore, because they think they are covering up stories to stop Trump, and the effect is they voted for Trump. The effect is the opposite they wanted. And so we have to maintain the trust for a bigger audience than the people that are on our side. Even if you want to achieve a political goal, you must be tenable by the other side, that they believe your facts. If they don't believe your facts anymore, it's not journalism anymore. You can't be a journalist if nobody believes you.
Do you want to? Yeah.
I take it more as a comment. I agree actually with the fact that if we try to push things too much in one direction, like I write for different publications, frankly, whosoever will respond first and publish it. But I published with this one media outlet just a couple of times, and somebody said, "Oh, you write for them, I know what you're going for." And they do have a kind of a venting tone which, pushes them in a certain direction, and people feel like, oh, they always speak like that, and they're against this party. And I think it really doesn't help the case. I mean, you can keep on doing it and you will have your audience. But I would, I don't want to speak to an echo chamber. So I would keep a little more distance, make sure this is not an opinion piece, etc. So I agree that we should not push too much for a certain kind of impact and have a certain goal, because then we are, driven by an agenda.
I mean, I guess the goal is what you're saying. It's truth, and it's not an agenda of a particular political outcome or a particular as I said in my previous answer. But I think this idea that you have to think about whose truth, right? Because a lot of the traditional media hasn't been representative, and we talked about we're seeing audiences like that breakdown in trust you're talking about. I'd say is more a result of a sort of lack of representation and just a particular way of operating that has been disingenuous in many ways. But the agenda, the goal is that the truth is told, and that the truth actually reaches people in a way and format in which they can use it and take it to benefit their own lives. It's not I just think if we think a lot more strategically and thoughtfully and a lot more representatively and inclusively about how we gather and share and distribute that truth, then the journalism is going to be doing its job.
If I can add one quick thing, when we're talking about activism, journalism, we're talking about impact. I think fundamentally we're talking about change, right? Do we need to do things differently? So what are we doing now, and what has that caused? Like, we look at the world we're living in. Look at what's happening. We want to make a difference. This is the difference that we're making. We're moving in the opposite direction, where consistently against marginalized communities, but consistently against marginalized people. When I say we, this is generalization, not everyone, of course. As an industry, we need to reflect, and we need to say that, yes, we have done way more harm than good for millions of people on this planet because of status quo journalism. This is the reality. We need to accept this. If the current way of doing journalism is creating harm, change is necessary. How do we bring change? Activism journalism is a way to make that change. It is not wrong. It is not, if you want to say it's wrong, fine. At one point, when shit hits the fan, at one point, when your lives are in danger, you will suddenly open your eyes and say, oh, actually, this is what we need to do. Millions of journalists around the world are doing this, and millions of journalists in certain parts of the world are saying what you're doing is wrong. It is not. People's lives are being lost. We do way more harm than good for millions of people around the world. If activism journalism is a way to minimize that harm, to stop that harm, this is what we need to do. This is what we need to do. This is what we need to do. We need to help people. Basically, that is it. Activism journalism is just a way to do it.
Yes! Okay. Right, okay, we're definitely 2 minutes over. I think that's a really good place to end. But honestly, we wanted people in the room, and we said, didn't we? We want people that disagree with us. So although it might, yeah, we don't want to just be speaking to an echo chamber. So if you do disagree and if you want to continue the debate, then please come and find us, especially Rona. She'd love to have an argument with like anybody in the room. No, we like disagreeing. So yeah, you can find us all. We'd love to continue the conversation, and thank you for being here. Oh my goodness, Colin, you need to be a